11:05 work for you, Councilor Bach?
Yeah, it's fine.
Perfect.
I think we're just, let me see. I think I didn't see Joe Kreisberg
I
on.
just saw you and Council President Janey and now Arroyo. That's what I saw.
Okay, yeah. And the only panelist we're missing is Joe Kreisberg. So I'll just make sure my team's got him the link. But Lauren, thanks for joining us.
Morning, Madam Chair. Again.
Got you down, Councilor Braden. I cannot see myself. It's the most annoying thing. Tim Davis is here. See you, Tim. Promote you.
Oh, I guess, Madam Chair, so Joe Kreisberg's going to be a little bit late, but since he's the last on the panel, that should be fine.
Okay, no problem. And then I see Lauren and Mac from GBLS and Gail and Dana. Are these all panelists of yours, Councilor Bach?
I think Dana and Gail are both with the BHA, so they're probably here to support Administrator Bennett, but maybe let them in so they can.
Not a problem. And then Lauren and Mac, are they part of your panels from GBLS?
They're not on the panel, but we're delighted they're here. So
awesome. Ooh.
We did we asked we invited GBLS to come, and so yeah, we're happy that, and I see Steve too. Great, excellent.
Nice. All right, well, I have my introduction. Why don't we go ahead and get started? We'll do some quick rounds and then we'll get to the hearing. And Joe is coming late though, but he's coming.
Yes, so yeah, GBLS and City Life Leader Urbana will both be testifying right after the panel, just for your.
Okay. All right then, so we're gonna get started. Councilor Mejia has just joined us, and okay, great. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lydia Edwards. I am the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Housing and Community Development. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Councilor Bach, who is the lead sponsor of this matter, order for hearing regarding increasing public housing in the city of Boston. Councilor Janey, our City Council President, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Mejia. I want to remind you that this is a public hearing. It's recorded and will be rebroadcasted on Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 964 at a later date. It is currently being streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. We will also take public testimony at the end if anyone has signed up. And if you are interested in testifying, you can still email Ron, RON.Cobb, COBB, @boston.gov for the link, and I'll follow along on the live stream and also submit your testimony. Please state your name and your affiliation and residence, especially if you come into the Zoom hearing. We really prefer that you have a full name that we can pronounce so that we can call your name. Today's hearing order is about increasing the public housing options in the city of Boston. Panelists today will include the BHA, Boston Housing Authority, the Administrator Kate Bennett, Special Advisor of Planning and Policy, Joe Wolf. We also include Department of Neighborhood Development with Tim Davis, I believe, representing the DND. I have also Sheila Dillon possibly here or able to come. And then I have Family Aid Boston, Larry Siemens, and the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations, Joe Kreisberg. I do believe actually signed up for a public testimony. We do have members from the community, including Greater Boston Legal Services and City Life Leader Urbana. So I'm going to go ahead and allow my colleagues to make some very brief opening remarks. This is a wonderful hearing to really talk of solutions-based way to make sure that there's more options in the city of Boston. Not a controversial one, so no need for long speeches. Anyway, my colleagues in order of arrival, as I stated, are Councilor Bach, Councilor Janey, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you to our panelists from BHA, DND, Family Aid, and MACDC for being here. and also GBLS and City Life Feeder Urbana. I'm really excited and grateful to have your partnership and support on this. And also Councillor Asabi George is on the desperate need for family housing in our city, and the way in which this could help to be a solution to that. As folks know, before coming to the council, I worked at the Boston Housing Authority, and I believe fundamentally that permanent, deeply affordable public housing with rent prorated according to income keeps people stably housed, even when, as in this moment, shocked by the twin crises of the coronavirus pandemic and widespread job loss. It really is so important. I think so often we talk about public housing like something that is passé, when in fact that mechanism of making rent meet people's means is, I think, a deeply humane and right social mechanism that we've moved too far away from. And it's something that the whole attitude behind it is something we need more of in this country. However, right now, the waitlist for the Boston Housing Authority stretches more than 50,000 families long, with only about 500 of our units turning over each year. So we just simply put need more public housing for our families and our most low income residents in the city. And I think that we have struggled again and again in this city with how to get that additional production, not just of affordable units, but of deeply affordable units, units that can really meet that large portion of our families that are making less than 30% of area median income. Public housing has, as I mentioned, really been shunted to the side for many decades. And actually back in 1999, the Federal Faircloth Amendment made it law that no housing authority could add any more public housing units than it operated that year ever again. So we got frozen at 1999 levels. But the really interesting thing is that Boston then did a bunch of redevelopment work that resulted in a loss of units, a de-densification. And so as a result, we in Boston are now almost 2,500 units below that limit. So our Faircloth limit is 12,086 units, and we only have 9,622 on the books. What's so exciting about that to me is it means that there's the opportunity to create more public housing units and actually connect them to public subsidy. And then an opportunity with some other recent programs that have been created at the federal level to make those financially sustainable. So to me, I really am eager to get to work using this avenue to build, buy, or certify up to 2,464 more public housing units. And the most exciting prospect to me would be to build new public housing units on land that the city controls, whether at existing public housing developments, vacant lots, or above other public assets. I think it's an opportunity to really utilize the full value of public land for public good. But I also think there's a bunch of creative ways to work with existing projects we have on the private side to think about the AOP program. There's a lot of neat stuff, and I'm excited to dig in with the BHA and D&D on this. No matter what avenue we take, making a plan for Boston to get back up to our Faircloth limit is a way of really breathing reality into those phrases we find ourselves saying in the pandemic, right? That housing is healthcare, housing's a human right, housing should be for all. So really excited to discuss this today, and thank you, Madam Chair.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Councillor Janey.
Thank you so much. And just quickly, many thanks to the maker. Many thanks to the panel here. I love, the public housing, public land for a public good. I would argue that part of that public good is for food and gardens, but we're here to talk about housing. I know many of my colleagues, we all boast about who has the most public housing in our districts. I'd like some clear answers to that. I see Councillor Flynn, Councillor Edwards, and Councillor Bach, we all kind of fight for that title. What I'll say is that public housing, deeply affordable housing, is critically important in terms of making sure that we have all the tools necessary in our toolbox to deal with our housing crisis. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about how we can ensure that the residents of Boston actually can stay in the city of Boston. And it should be that all of us have housing that is based on our incomes, and that no one is paying over 30%, but we know that's not the case. And so I think this is an important conversation, and I'm happy and ready to get right into it. Thank you again, Madam Chair, and thank you again, Councillor Bach. Madam Chair, we cannot hear you. Okay.
Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments brief. Obviously, I support the expansion of public housing and affordable housing in the city of Boston. I would also support and hope to hear a little bit. I know it's about building new public housing, but also updating and upgrading current public housing is incredibly important to me. I have the Archdale homes in my district that haven't been touched, I believe, since they were essentially created. And so these are the kinds of things that obviously federal funding has dried up for, but I am interested in hearing, especially as we move into another administration, where we can lobby, where the work can be done to get this done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the sponsors of this very, very important hearing. I think you all know where I stand on this. I really feel that affordable housing for low-income population is incredibly important. In Alston Brighton, our CDC has a wait list of 17,000 people waiting for affordable housing in this district. And I know the BHA list is enormous. In terms of also building additional physical units, but also making sure that the units that we do have are maintained. And also in terms of support services, making sure that the residents of these units have adequate support services is also a challenge, as we're finding out here in Alston Brighton, so that the residences are safe and healthy places for folks to live as well. So I think I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I think this is a very exciting initiative. Thank you.
Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes, good morning. I'm not on mute, am I? Thank you, Councillor Edwards and Bach, for calling this hearing. I just hopped off of a meeting with former Councillor Sakam on the subject of housing, so it's been a very housing-centered morning so far. I look forward to finding ways to increase public housing, but more importantly, finding ways to make public housing a space where people actually want to live in. I think it's really important when we think about public housing, there's always a lot of stigma associated with it in terms of who lives there and how they live. And I'm just curious how this conversation could really help also bring to light the fact that there's a lot of stigma around public housing already. And would love to hear ways that we can create opportunities for the community to help inform what new housing projects could look like in terms of the design process. I think that oftentimes we're building for and not with. And if there's a way for us to talk about this and create a seat at the table for people to also bring in some of their voices, I think that would be exciting.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I want to say thank you to Councillor Edwards and to Councillor Bach for sponsoring this hearing. As you know, I represent a large number of constituents who live in public housing from South Boston, the South End, Chinatown, also to the Back Bay area, St. Petolf Street apartments, which I spend a lot of time there, along with Rep. John Santiago. So I'm glad that Councillor Bach is sponsoring this hearing to discuss how we can increase public housing in our city. The rent for living in public housing, obviously based on income, tenants living in public housing have a much less risk of being unable to afford their rent. As we talk about housing stability, and as we are in the midst of an economic downturn during this pandemic, I think it's a great opportunity to talk about how we can create more affordable housing, options like public housing or subsidized housing. And in the South End, I know it has the highest percentage of residents living in subsidized housing as well. The federal government, unfortunately, has walked away from creating public housing, so it's now up to state and local governments to take up the mantle in creating affordable housing. We had a great BHA administrator, a friend to all of us, Billy McGonigal, who before his passing worked on innovative approaches in public and private partnerships to deal with these issues. And I know Kate Bennett in the BHA team is working extremely hard on a whole host of issues and are extremely responsive to the residents' needs, and that all of us are committed to ensuring stable housing for our residents. I'd also like to acknowledge Sheila Dillon's team as well at Department of Neighborhood Development, and Mayor Walsh, but just so proud. I know we had a debate earlier on who represents the most public housing, but I think I probably win that one, including Mary Ellen McCormick, Old Colony, West Broadway, St. Petolf Street, Cathedral, Foley, Powers. So I spend a lot of my time in public housing, but I have a lot of great respect. I have a lot of great respect for the BHA workers. I see them all the time with rakes. They're cleaning, they're sweeping, they're doing plumbing work, they're doing electrical work. In cold days, they're responding to BHA property, making sure the residents have what they need. So I just want to say thank you to Kate Bennett, but I want to say thank you to the co-sponsors, Councilor Edwards and Councilor Bach. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are no other councilors who joined, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly note, I think I compete with Councilor Flynn for the most waterfront and also for the most public housing. Maybe he does have more units. I think late great Billy McGonigal told me you have more units, but I still have the largest single development, BHA development in the city of Boston. So that's our truce. But I think both of us are very much dedicated to trying to make sure that we are not only adding the options, and that's what I feel like we're doing. This is not just a public housing thing. This is about the options being made available to people, and the way in which people, our incomes go up and down throughout our lives. Trauma happens up and down throughout our lives. We want people to have housing options throughout their lives. You may start in one and may need something else. And we would love for the city of Boston to have as many of those options in the city of Boston. As people are now having to look to other cities that are more affordable or have more public housing options available, that to me is a loss. And this is adding to our the options for our community, to the tools in the toolbox to prevent displacement. On top of that, I think it's very important, as Councilor Arroyo alluded to, and also Councilor Finn mentioned, it's the upgrade and the maintenance of the housing stock that we have as well. And yes, there's a public-private partnership that we are doing, even in Charlestown right now, to make sure that we are doing just that. But it's really important that when we think about the future housing that comes around, what lessons did we learn? Will new units, if given the funding, be green? Will they be solar ready? These are the things that I want also to be part of our conversation. How aesthetically beautiful will they be? Will they look separate and apart from other housing? There's new theories around trauma-informed development and urban planning that I'd love for us to look at in other cities as well. How many more of these units will be sober housing? How much dedication will we have to mental health? And all of those things, I would love to be part of this conversation. And I'd love to see models throughout the country that help to make the next 2,500 units that I'm more than committed to hopefully bring about one day, that they are the ideal housing unit. And they're ideal because it doesn't matter how much money you make, you could have access to them. So I'm going to turn it over now to Councilor Bach, who can introduce the panelists and let me know. You could do each panel, Councilor Bach, if you'd like, and depending on how you prefer, we could have all the panelists speak and then just have the councilors go after, which probably makes more sense since this is more informative. Or if you prefer panel Q&A.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think probably it makes sense to let our panel sort of speak in the opening, and then us follow up with questions across the board, just in the interest of time. And I'll say that just to also set the scene for the panel, I made a suggestion formally in council with filing this hearing order back in July, and with an op-ed that I wrote, just about the fact that that I think that there really is an opportunity because of a set of federal subsidy programs kind of lining up in a particular way, and the openness in the city capital budget to supporting public housing in a new way, for us to do something innovative here. And I've been really encouraged by the fact that both the Housing Authority and D&D have responded to that with some work looking at how they could use this subsidy in new ways. And so I think it's exciting today that we'll get to hear from them about that. So I think the first person on the panel would be the administrator for the Boston Housing Authority, Kate Bennett. I know she's got her team with her, but I think would go to Kate and then to Chief of Housing, Sheila Dillon, and then two of the allies in this work in the housing community, Larry Siemens from Family Aid, and then Joe Kreisberg from MACDC. And Kate also used to be my boss. So without further ado, Kate Bennett.
Thanks, Counselor. I just, for the record, Kate Bennett, Administrator and CEO of the Boston Housing Authority. I just really want to start by thanking all of the counselors on the call. I've worked with all of you on behalf of public housing residents in Boston. You all clearly care deeply about your public housing communities and residents, and that is truly appreciated not only by me, but our community of employees and, of course, our 50,000 plus residents. So, and to hear you all fighting over having who has the most is just, it's awesome. So thank you to start with. Public housing is a strong part of the urban fabric of Boston, and it's deeply rooted in the history of almost every neighborhood in the city. We've got many challenges with our portfolio, but we have increasingly shown that public housing can be much more than a stable home. It means vital connections to neighbors, services, education, and civic life in Boston. And it's also critically a contemporary solution to the city's affordable housing crisis. It's really an integral part of keeping Boston affordable and accessible. And an untapped opportunity that Councillor Bach has rightfully promoted is our ability to offer public housing subsidy to units in addition to our current portfolio. So HUD allows us to add public housing units up to the Faircloth limit. And Councillor Bach went through the numbers, but essentially, we can request additional operating subsidy from HUD to the tune of 2,300 to 2,400 units as the numbers are currently landing. And, our current portfolio is smaller than it used to be, primarily for two reasons. First, in the earlier days of Hope 6 redevelopment, we did de-densify. We built, we replaced all the units, but we replaced some offsite as project-based voucher units. We don't do that anymore. We are committed to doing one-for-one hard unit replacement on site now. And the other thing that we did in the 90s and early 2000s was we created a lot more accessible public housing units in our portfolio, and that meant combining small units together to make them accessible for folks with mobility impairments. And so through those two initiatives, we've lost units over the years, and that's what's kind of created this dormant subsidy opportunity. And there's several challenges that come with the additional subsidy. We have made concerted efforts over the years to try to utilize or offer up the opportunity to worthy projects. But the subsidy is shallow, and it's just hasn't been sufficient to leverage meaningful debt or really make the numbers work in a project that's building new construction or where there's costly renovation work happening. And what's different now, which Councillor Bach alluded to, is that there's an additional tool that sort of increases this shallow subsidy to something more practical and usable, called the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD program. And this program allows us to convert public housing units to a deeper subsidy that's part of the Section 8 program. And so RAD subsidy can be literally hundreds of dollars more per unit monthly than traditional public housing subsidy. And so there's still a need for significant capital dollars, even under the RAD program. And I don't want that point to be lost. This isn't a magic bullet. It will take additional resources, but the RAD platform really opens the door to two important possibilities. One, to create net new, deeply affordable units that are available to residents regardless of what their income is, because the rent structure of these units is 30% of your gross income regardless of what your income is. So it's a deeply affordable unit. The second possibility is that we could attach this subsidy to existing tax credit or higher affordable units and make them deeply affordable to a family that has an extremely low income. And so to that end, BHA has taken several steps to explore utilizing our Fair Cloth subsidy. First, we've been working with an architect to review underutilized BHA-owned parcels to consider where we can actually add units within our own portfolio. Secondly, we've engaged in discussion with the Housing Innovation Lab at D&D to explore opportunities to expand housing over public facilities like libraries, and as part of the whole housing public assets conversation. We're also working actively with D&D to identify projects and programs that could take advantage of the subsidy in their pipeline. We've made an initial presentation to the CDCs to sort of get them evaluating that opportunity. And we actually did do one project in the past with the Alston Brighton CDC utilizing the subsidy. And so we want to, sort of re-up a conversation with both for-profit and nonprofit developers about their future projects and where this could potentially fit in. And lastly, we're engaging with BPDA on opportunities that they may have through city-owned land or through the Article 80 process as they're negotiating their own deals and transactions, that this is something that could potentially come into the mix to help with affordability, whether it's to create new units or deepen affordability. And so we expect by the end of the first quarter of 2021, we'll finalize a plan to move forward on at least some of those opportunities. The subsidy can be applied to public or private affordable housing. And so that means that if a property owner is able and willing to partner with BHA, we could potentially significantly lower the area median income restriction on a unit. The process to tap the subsidy is not simple. And again, it will ultimately require partnerships and resources, but given the severity of the housing crisis, BHA intends to explore every opportunity to better integrate affordable housing into pockets of the city with fewer housing opportunities, to support other public and city-funded initiatives, and to explore increasing density on certain parcels owned by the housing authority. So look forward to the dialogue. Again, thanks to Councillor Bach for putting this forward, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Councillor Bach, if we were going to go ahead.
Yeah, I would say next going to Chief Dillon from D&D.
Thank you, and I will be brief. I think Kate really summarized what we've been thinking of and working on. But for the record, my name is Sheila Dillon, and I'm Chief of Housing for the City of Boston, and I'm the Director of the Department of Neighborhood Development. And I too am sort of sitting here, and I just wanted to echo something that Director Bennett said. And we do have a City Council, and I mean this, that really cares deeply about expanding the affordable housing in every neighborhood, which is, that's not true in every city. So I just want to thank you for your support and partnership. When this resource came to light, I just want to say that D&D was incredibly excited. I mean, it will expands a very important housing resource at a time where there's not a lot of new rental subsidies coming from the federal government. Hope against hope that will change with the new administration. But I think given the budget woes that this our feds will be facing, I don't think we can count on that. So this is a very innovative, wonderful resource that I hope to work with the BHA and put to good use as quickly as possible. Some ideas were mentioned. Let me just add to that list. We have the Acquisition Opportunity Program, which many of us love. And we have been helping nonprofits and for-profits buy some very significant properties as of late in the last 30, 60 days, as the market is getting a little bit softer, a little bit choppier, and there's opportunities there for nonprofit and for-profit developers of affordable housing to buy units in the market and take them out of the speculative market and make permanently affordable. If we can use this resource, we can have those developments serve a lower income population and act as a buffer for folks. I think it was Councilor Edwards that mentioned that incomes, especially now, are going up and down. With the rental subsidy attached to those units, they'll buffer, able to help people weather the storm. We do always have a healthy project pipeline, and I think everyone appreciates the effort that our affordable housing community has put into that pipeline. But the criticism often is the affordable housing that we're funding as a city isn't deeply affordable enough. And it is very difficult financially to reach very low incomes without a rental subsidy attached to the housing that's being produced, because you just can't support enough debt and then the subsidy becomes too great. So I'm hoping that we can use some of this resource on the upcoming pipelines to really have, to create deeper affordable housing. The Housing Innovation Lab was mentioned, which is I think housing and public assets, great, all day long. It would be great to team up that resource as we look at development opportunities in our libraries, in our fire stations, et cetera. And finally, we are putting out a lot of land, and we have been in all of the RFPs. Most of the RFPs, most communities are saying we want affordable housing on this land, but we want the land to serve lower income families and individuals. So if we can take the land RFPs and team it up with this resource, then it's more realistic that developers will be able to come forward with those type of developments. So I'm looking forward to working with the BHA, looking forward to working with the City Council and the affordable housing community to think about this resource, get creative, and get the resource on the street quickly. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief Dillon. And now we're going to go to Larry Siemens from Family Aid just to talk about the kind of need for this resource in the city.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Bach, Madam Chair, Madam President, Chief Dillon, Administrator Bennett, City Council members, colleagues at the BHA, DND, and other service providers who are here today. For the record, I'm Larry Siemens. I'm the president of Family Aid Boston. We're the city's largest homeless prevention, shelter, and housing provider that's dedicated solely to unstably housed children and parents and homeless families here in the city of Boston. Today, I want to share with you a little bit of perspective of what we're seeing on the ground right now during the pandemic. In addition to our historic work that we've done with DND and other service city agencies, we're currently also serving as the exclusive housing assessment, placement, and stabilization partner, along with the Boston Public Schools, the Boston Housing Authority, DND, to secure 500 Section 8 vouchers that Mayor Walsh very astutely dedicated to families that are doubled up. These are families that are living in overcrowded conditions with other families because of economic hardship. Currently, we're serving every day 2,600 Boston children and parents. That's a 62% increase over last year, largely prompted by the economic and housing crises that have been created by the pandemic. The growth in the population, in our population, is solely coming from the homeless prevention program that's focused on the 500 vouchers. And the math is simple. We have 1,000 additional parents and children seeking 500 vouchers. So the harsh reality is that not every family who is coming looking for housing support because they're doubled up, this is not homeless families, these are just families who are on the teetering, on the edge of it, they're not going to get the help that they need right now, despite the very, very best efforts of the mayor, the housing authority, the school system, and those of us in the service provision area. There's simply not enough vouchers or units in the city of Boston to meet the needs of our families. So in fact, if you go back and look at some of the research from the Boston Planning and Development Agency in 2019, their report shows that there are 65,000 Boston households living in, at, or below poverty. That's $21,000 a year for a family of three. That's actually at 19% of the area median income here in the city of Boston, which is $107,000. And then there are tens of thousands of families who are somewhere between that low number and what the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's estimates are that a family actually needs to have a living wage of about $80,000 to live safely in the city of Boston. So we're talking of hundreds of thousands of residents. So this is the significant number of families who are kind of living on the edge that's actually driven one of our national rankings, and it's a very sad one. According to last year's annual homeless assessment report, Boston is the city throughout the entire country. We're number 3 in terms of the number of homeless children and parents in the country, despite the fact that we're the 21st most populous state. To me, that's shocking to have that ranking. We are number 3 is not a good thing. The crisis actually was foreseen 4 years ago by the Boston Foundation. They had a 2016 report on family homelessness that noted then, and it was just that they had seen kind of this trajectory of where we're headed now, was saying that the result was sheer poverty. Stagnant wages for the working class in retail and service industries were being matched up against the high cost of rents. As you know, we're the 3rd highest rental market in the country, and the lack of sufficient low-income housing. That is housing for families whose median income is 30% or lower than the average. We saw it coming, and here we are. So there are no easy answers for families. They're doing what they need to right now. We're seeing that they're living with other family members, often illegally in overcrowded conditions, in many cases in Boston Housing Authority, and they've been very supportive of our families during the pandemic. Some are living in cars, and ultimately, when none of those work, they're living in shelters, or in the case of our programs with Boston Children's Hospital and Boston Medical Center, boarding in ERs as a way of finding safety. To make matters worse, the economic impacts of the pandemic is turning our city's family homelessness crisis into what we believe is a low-income housing crisis as well. Because economists, if you're reading what the economists are saying, is that for those on our lowest rungs of our economic ladder here in the city, their ability to climb out of the pandemic is going to be the longest, and their debt is increasing. Right now, in researching the families who are part of our program, we're finding families already have developed over $18,000 in debt just on rent and utilities alone in the last 9 months. And then I know we've turned to the state. There are increases. You probably saw there's $171 million additional dollars coming into RAFT. However, that's a drop in the bucket against an estimated 300,000 households across the state who are struggling to pay rent. So that's the challenge before us. And in some ways, it's quite depressing. And for those of us in the field working, and I know I have some colleagues that we work with from GBLS, what we're seeing is really a very challenging time. I do believe that there, though, is some signs of hope. I think the first is the legacy, the talent and the innovation and leadership that kind of reflects the Boston Housing Authority and their efforts to kind of bring some new innovations to tackle the issues. So I've worked with the BHA across the table for 22 years. I've got tremendous respect for Mr. McGonigal and all the great work he had done. He's left a great legacy, and I've been incredibly impressed over the last 9 months in this work with Mayor's Vouchers, to work with Kate Barrett's team, who've just done an amazing job to really expedite and find innovation to get housing to families as quickly as possible. It's just really impressive. The second, I think, is the ordinance before you and the thinking that Councillor Bach has brought relative to the opportunities to meet the fair cloth limits. It's really, in our view, it's really strategic and an innovative way to increase the number of units of low-income housing for families who are making 30% of AMI or lower. when it can be attached to tax credit units or combined with mod HABRE units, it actually, we believe, will attract developers to take on low-wage earners as tenants, which is what we're struggling with right now with the vouchers that are currently in the market. And the third option, I think, is your vote tomorrow to approve a special commission and family homelessness. I apologize, Councillor Bach, but Councillor and Mrs. Asabi-George would be very disappointed if I didn't mention that today. So combined, I do believe that all these steps are in the right direction to reduce both our family homelessness crisis in the city and to stem what we believe is a growing low-income housing crisis as well. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Speaking of which, Councillor Asabi-George has joined us as one of our colleagues. And Councillor Asabi-George, I didn't know if you wanted any brief opening remarks, or we'll just go ahead through the panel.
I just want to say I timed my arrival to this hearing perfectly. Thank you, Larry, for that. And I do hope that colleagues will sign on to pass that tomorrow. Thank you.
And there's no conflict. We're all rowing in the same direction when it comes to trying to resolve family homelessness here. So
Right.
It's really, yeah, it's everything, putting everything towards that. The last member of our panel, Madam Chair, is Joe Kreisberg, who represents MACDC, which is the Massachusetts Association of CDCs. And as Administrator Bennett alluded to, we had a meeting with his members to sort of talk about ways to use the subsidy. And so Joe is just here to speak on behalf of the folks who do produce these affordable units in the city and region.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, Chairwoman Edwards, members of the council, Administrator Bennett, Chief Dillon. I got to get all the titles right. It's great to be here and see everybody. We did have a meeting in September about the Faircloth Amendment, and I think it's fair to say for most of us, it was the first time we'd ever heard of the Faircloth Amendment. So I want to thank Councillor Bach for continuing our education about affordable housing, which is never ending. I represent, well, for the record, Joe Kreisberg, Mass Association of CDCs, and a resident of West Roxbury. And I represent 20 CDCs in Boston who collectively own and manage approximately 8,500, 9,000 units of housing all across the city. And we did have an excellent discussion with the BHA and the DND, I think it was in September. And our folks are really excited about this resource, this potential resource, and want to be partners in making it work because it addresses at least 3 critical issues that we struggle with as developers and owners of affordable housing. As I think most of you know, we rely heavily, almost exclusively really, on the low-income housing tax credit from the federal government, which is a great program, but also a program that has some limitations. It's aimed at serving people between 50 and 60% of area median income. And Lord knows they need help, but they're not the only ones who need help, and they're not the folks who need the help the most as compared to people with even lower incomes. The other thing about the low-income housing tax credit and the way it was designed is the rents are fixed. So as a tenant's income goes up, the rent doesn't go up. That's the good news. But if their income goes down, the rent is fixed, and that can cause some serious problems. And because the tax credit program is the primary way in which the federal government funds new affordable housing, it's really become the sun around which everything else revolves and ends up dominating the way these projects get financed and structured. So we're always looking for other tools that can help serve lower income families and households because we know that's where the critical need is at. And that's been borne out even more so during the pandemic, where when we look at the risk of eviction, we look at which tenants are really the most at risk, it's definitely at the lower end of the income spectrum. So it's always been a problem, but it's even more so now. The other thing that the COVID has underscored and sort of revealed, I think, to the larger community, maybe in a way that wasn't as visible, is the problem of overcrowding. Overcrowding is almost by design somewhat invisible to the larger population because, you know, we don't go in other people's homes. We don't know how many people live in those homes. Often people who are overcrowding don't want other folks to know that's happening. They may not want the landlord to know, or health officials, because there may be breaking rules in order to survive. And so overcrowding is often an under-recognized problem. And with COVID and with the transmission of the virus, it's really revealed itself to be a killer and a serious problem. And why do people overcrowd? Well, it's all about money and math, and the fact that it's the only way many households can piece together enough income to pay the rent. So getting more affordable housing online and housing that is truly affordable will help address this serious health issue of overcrowding. And the other thing that COVID has sort of underscored is the fact that a lot of lower income families, their incomes are unstable. They get some extra work, they make a little more, they lose work. Their jobs are often the most fragile or vulnerable. Their income goes down, and having an adjustable rent that is scaled to their income is really key to housing stability and helping them manage through periods where maybe they're doing a little better or periods where they're doing not as well. So what's exciting about this tool is it allows us to address all these issues, serving the community, the population that is most in need, providing them with a rent that is adjustable based on their income, reducing overcrowding. So how do we make it work? That, I think, is really the question. I think you have willing partners in the nonprofit sector, folks who are used to doing complicated financing and suffering the brain damage that comes along with that sometimes. I think the key is can the additional rules, regulations, structures that are required to tap into this resource, does the math make it work so that it actually results in lower incomes? And it's, I think in most cases, going to be layered on top of other financing, and sometimes those rules can contradict each other, and that's part of where it gets particularly difficult. If you have HUD telling you to do X and the IRS rules are telling you to do Y, we have to find a way to resolve that, and maybe we'll have a more friendly HUD in the next few years to help us, get the waivers we might need or the flexibility we need to really put this in action, because 2,400 units would go a long way to addressing the needs that we have. So we're excited to work with you to make this happen, and appreciate the opportunity today to speak with you.
Great. Thanks so much, Madam Chair. I don't want to overstep.
No problem. I appreciate that. So we've gone through the panelists. Did you want possibly to have public testimony too, since Greater Boston Legal Services and City Life are waiting?
I think that would be excellent.
Okay. Okay, great. So for public testimony, we have Lauren Song from Greater Boston Legal Services. Lauren's been let in, I believe. Lauren, are you still there?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chairwoman Councilor Edwards and sponsor Councilor Bach and the rest of the City Council for convening this important hearing. My name is Lauren Song, and I'm here with my colleague, Mac McCrae. We're attorneys with Housing Unit of the Greater Boston Legal Services. So to start with some sobering numbers, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to rage, today's Globe reported that notwithstanding that the federal eviction moratorium that was announced in September by the Centers for Disease Control is still in force until the end of this month at least, 743 new eviction cases were filed in the housing courts last week alone, the most in any week in 2020 since the end of the state's eviction moratorium in October. Against this sobering backdrop and historic unemployment rates, we're really heartened that the housing justice work is continuing in Boston, led by this amazing City Council and our housing justice leaders, Sheila Dillon and Kate Bennett. Indeed, Boston has been taking aggressive steps to address the affordable housing shortage in the city of Boston since 2014, when the Mayor's Housing Advisory Task Force, that is led by Chief Dillon, issued the Housing a Changing City Boston 2030 report, which is the city's comprehensive plan to address the city's perennial housing supply and affordability challenges to achieve a more equitable and inclusive city. The original plan, which was updated in 2018, called for not only the preservation of existing affordable housing and better protection of the city's existing diverse residents against involuntary displacement, but also the production of 16,000 new income restricted housing by 2030 to bring the Boston's total number to 70,000 by 2030. And on October 1st, the plan crossed the 6,000 unit production mark for income restricted units. Chief Dillon also initiated, as she had mentioned, the city's acquisition opportunity program to support the acquisition and deed restriction of properties as affordable housing, and to also protect against condominium conversions, and have adopted various measures to protect vulnerable residents against involuntary displacement, including the creation of the Office of Housing Stability, OHS, in 2016, which was the first of its kind in the nation, and of which Councillor Edwards actually became the first deputy director. And that enables the city to work across city departments and with external partners like Greater Boston Legal Services to achieve housing security for tenants and homeowners at risk of displacement. In early January, the DND and BHA also jointly announced the first city-funded rental voucher program. All this is just exciting, amazing thing. And I know that as we're talking about a lot of negative events, we wanted to just kind of recognize historically the achievements of this wonderful city and the city councilors and the housing leaders, because we are a unique city and we have done much. Yet, as the country continues to reckon with the COVID-19 emergency, the Boston Housing Authority also continues to provide not just deeply affordable housing for about 9% of the city's low-income residents in and around Boston. But as Kate Bennett had mentioned, the city has really focused on the purpose of its provision of housing, which is much more than housing units, but also using housing as a way to provide its residents with services. And to support their sufficiency and capacity. And I think that's a really important part of the aspect of public housing that other councilors here have also mentioned, that it's not just about providing housing, a roof over your head, but what housing means in so many different ways in terms of enabling our families to achieve all that they can and navigate, especially this COVID pandemic. But there are over 40,000 households that are on BHA's wait list. BHA residents and applicants are generally a very diverse, racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse population. 72% are either Latinx or Black, and only 51% report that their primary language is English. The vast majority of the residents and 94% of the households on the wait list are extremely low income, meaning that they're at or below 30% of the area median income. Notwithstanding the pandemic challenges, BHA, under Administrator Bennett's leadership, has forged ahead through virtual platforms with an aggressive plan to pursue all opportunities to create additional affordable housing units in the city of Boston. Greater Boston Legal Services is very privileged to work with the BHA as well as City Life in making sure that some of these public housing conversions that she has mentioned, which has opened up the fair cloth limit and possibilities, are being done in a way that also protects the residents and carries over the protections that public housing residents have, even as they're being converted into mixed income housing situations. So I just want to flag that for you, that this isn't just about converting units, it's really about protecting the residents, and the purpose of the service of public housing is being preserved. So all that is said is in addressing, it's important to note that while affordable housing is often used as a term to cover a broad range of income restricted housing that are below market, typically those rents are not enough still to make the rent affordable for most of the occupants in high cost cities like Boston. In contrast, rents for public housing are deeply affordable in the sense that they are based on the income of residents to ensure that they do not pay more than 30% of household income, adjusted household income for housing, or 32% in the case of state public housing for Massachusetts. Yet, notwithstanding these positive features of public housing, as others have mentioned previously before me, have been really stigmatized and disfavored in the United States by United States policymakers, which has caused this very important program that serves really the most vulnerable and is really essential for diversity of high-cost cities like Boston to suffer a really dangerous divestment for decades. Established in 1937, the public housing program produced nearly 1.4 million units nationwide, but today there's only about 1 million of that's remaining. And of those that remain, many are in really severely distressed conditions, which I know, for example, City Councilor Mejia mentioned that was a concern, not just the creation of new public housing, but what are we doing with the existing public housing stock and its deplorable state. This is because the conditions require about 49 billion in backlog of unaddressed repairs that the federal government is not willing to address. And add to all of this, the Faircloth Amendment, which Councillor Bach provided a little bit of the history in, was added to the Housing Act of 1937, passed in 1998, and prohibited any net increases in the number of public housing units beyond the number that was in existence as of September 1st, 1999. And due to these combination of factors, we've lost and we will continue to lose about 10,000 public housing units per year nationally. Today, in the backdrop against all of this, we're very heartened to hear public housing being raised as a solution to the city's perennial affordable housing crisis and the cycle of massive eviction worries that we have been addressing, the City Council has been addressing for years now. Currently, as a result of all the losses, I believe that Boston saw about an 18% reduction in its public housing stock since 1997. And that's the amount that we can make up to use to create additional affordable housing units through the various many innovative tools that have been mentioned before. I would note that the private market has not and does not make up for the public housing that has been lost. The public housing is clearly suffering from decades of divestment, but cities like Boston have great initiatives to support a public housing revival that can provide truly deeply affordable housing for its most vulnerable residents and to advance a housing justice policy that will ensure that the affordable units remain under public stewardship after construction and conversion to provide the support services, et cetera, that has usually been associated with the idea of public housing. Sometimes what is holding up the creation of new public housing, and this has been mentioned previously also, is that the maintenance and operations of public housing once created is extremely stressed by the very limited capital fund and public housing operating funds that are provided to keep it going. But as others have mentioned previously, there are initiatives currently that would allow for the conversion once something became a public unit to actually have more stable operating platforms that would make it possible to sustain newly created public housing and maintain it properly. And furthermore, the Democrats have proposed additional investments in public housing, which can focus on some of the backlog of maintenance issues and future positive characterizations of public housing through additional funding of the public housing capital funds, and also focusing, as others have mentioned, the emergence of the energy efficiency and retrofitting into carbon neutral, retrofitting them into carbon neutrality. So although public housing may currently be stigmatized, the negative associations are not something that is inherent to socially or public provided housing. Fantastic public housing has been built around the world, creating strong, diverse, integrated communities and providing many opportunities for residents. In Vienna, for example, more than 60% of people live in public housing, so the stigma is not there. And it's designed to bring people together from a range of income brackets to live together harmoniously. And our largest public housing, which City Life loves to mention, is of course the White House. So the association of public housing with all the negative characters are not something that's inherent in publicly created housing. And I'm confident, as I'm sure my colleague Mac is and others of us here, that Boston, with this amazing city council, who is so clearly dedicated to the issues of housing justice and affordability and diversity, has all the necessary commitment as well as the creative policies that have already been initiated in many ways to achieve exactly this housing justice as necessary to preserve and protect our diverse and growing population. Councillor Edwards has noted in a recent article that she published in the Boston Bar Journal, Boston's Way Forward in Housing, that we need a multi-pronged approach that balances growth and prosperity with protection for all residents and addresses the widening wealth gap that plagues our city and the Commonwealth. And this has included proposals that the City Council has already discussed, which is leveraging publicly owned land, raising additional revenue for affordable housing through transfer fees that could generate as much as $169 million per year for affordable housing in Boston, which would greatly outstrip the current resources at the city's disposal. For example, the Acquisition Opportunity Program that Chief Dillon mentioned. The city can also further strengthen and expand the scope of its development impact programs, the linkage program, the inclusionary development policies, and enable Boston to align more flexibly and efficiently with changing market conditions, as well as the local needs, and create more income restricted units through that flexibility. Of course, we would also continue to advance all of the ideas about inclusive neighborhoods through planning and zoning that affirmatively furthers fair housing. And that's also something that the City Council and the City Chief Dillon's office and the BHA have aggressively pursued. And we thank you guys all for that. In short, governments have an important role in providing housing. We need the City Council's initiated solutions to match the need of the scale of housing that really has been plaguing the city for many, many years. And we thank the City Council and our city leaders for this opportunity to present this testimony. And thank you again for your support and the creative ideas. And we look forward to working with you to further housing equity and justice in the city of Boston.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate the long comment specifically for really demonstrating where everyone's hearts have been for years. And before we had this council, especially with Greater Boston Legal Services, your organizing and your efforts to keep moving this forward. And then just also reminding folks, how much of this depends on a lot of our colleagues in the State House getting some things done, hopefully this year. TOPA, Homes Act, a lot of linkage is still pending. So just some shout out to the ether and the universe that there is, when we talk about multi-prongs, we also mean multi-levels of government as well. So we can't just sandwich it with the two bookends of the city and the federal government. There's a state legislature in there as well. So fingers crossed. That's all I'm going to say about that. We can go on to Mac from Greater Boston Legal Services, and then Steve Meacham from City Life Vita Urbana.
I'm going to be far shorter because various people have made extremely eloquent statements before me that I would have no ability to top. I again want to thank all the council members for your past and continuing support on affordable housing. I thought it was really funny that there was this lottery about who had the most public housing and who was going to win that lottery. So it's like really such a mind shift from past conversations in this area. One thing I just wanted to mention and bring people back to was I kind of go back to the days of receivership, because since I became an attorney that worked on the BHA receivership from 1984 to 1989. And people may remember we lost 1,000 units of deeply affordable public housing at Harbor Point because of neglect and because we couldn't get the funding from HUD to then replace those 1,000 units. And Lauren and Steve and Gail Livingston, who I see also on this call, all worked together to do a presentation to the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association fairly recently to talk about the collaboration that BHA, GVLS, and City Life Vita Urbana are doing in the whole area of tenant empowerment. So that as BHA does redevelopment, it's making sure that residents are sort of front and center and that there are key protections that they're aware of and that they're in the driver's seat about keeping key areas of tenant participation. And there's a really useful discussion in there about the sort of past history of what happened at Harbor Point. And it's always important for us to keep that front and center. I really appreciate all the creative and depth of thought that people have done in working on this Fair Cloth initiative. I know that at the time that the RAD initiative was first developed back in 2009, 2010, a number of residents of the BHA actually went down to Washington, D.C. and talked with HUD officials there to help be involved in the design of that program. And initially, as that program was rolled out, it was a difficult program because, as people have mentioned, it would only replicate what you had for operating subsidy and capital subsidy, basically to repackage it. Over time, that target has moved, and HUD has, for example, said, we're going to set aside 25% of those units to also get more deeper subsidies through the Section 8 levels. And so I think from initially thinking, gee, this is not going to be enough of a funding stream to really work for Boston, to then, okay, let's figure out what we can do, because there's nothing new showing up on the horizon from the federal government. And so we have to work really hard. I agree totally with what Joe said earlier about sort of all the brain freezes that happen about the complications of the financing and everything else. But really, really, people have spent a lot of time working on this and appreciate this opportunity to bring this forward. We would be happy to share with the council members what Lauren had pulled together for the NLADA presentation, because I think it's a really useful sort of back history and backstory that shows why having collaborations like this are going to be so useful and why we're so blessed to have the leadership that we have right now working on this at the Housing Authority, at DND, and with yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Steve Meacham from City Life Peter Urbana.
Thank you all. I guess I would just say very, very briefly, City Life has been fighting against evictions and displacement for 47 years. Since the pandemic started, we fielded over 2,500 desperate calls from people facing eviction. This morning on the radio, I was listening to a report as I drove in about how the tsunami of evictions predicted by housing advocates has started to happen. And you've heard the statistic about that this last week was the highest number of filings in this year, and it'll, I'm sure, get worse in coming weeks. So that's kind of the context. City Life has supported public housing strongly, historically and today, for all those 47 years. Public housing has worked incredibly well, given its level of funding and the task assigned to it, compared to other possible initiatives. Certainly compared to, for instance, what's called expiring use housing. Public housing has remained affordable without rebuying the affordability year after year after year. And had public housing received the same level of funding that project-based Section 8 contracts are now providing around the city, we would be in a whole different ballgame. So I just think I want to acknowledge that, and I share, I think, Kate Bennett's reaction and what Mac mentioned about the fact that there's this debate on the city council about who has the most affordable housing, who has the most public housing units, and that's a good thing. That's just an extraordinary thing, and it's one of those small things that that gives us all heart and hope. I think I would just want to say that one of the things that City Life is especially interested in, I think, in this possibility of using the Faircloth initiative is the idea of getting buildings out of the market. One of the things that Sheila Dillon said about combining the Acquisition and Opportunities Program with Faircloth, I think that's something that we're incredibly interested in, because we are facing mass evictions at moments of sale. And if it's possible for nonprofits or the Boston Housing Authority or land trust to step in and buy those buildings instead of for-profit owners who are going to do mass evictions and big rent increases, that would be huge. And to have the Faircloth public housing money as part of an effort to buy those buildings at the point of sale, that could really change the ballgame in Boston. So I think I want to echo what everybody else has said in thanking the council for this hearing, and thanking Kate and her staff and Sheila and your staff for working with us so frequently on fighting against displacement. So again, thank you all, and I'm happy to be here. We're happy to be here.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Steve. So I want to announce Councilor Flaherty has also joined us. Councilor Flaherty, I didn't know if you had any introductory kind of quick comments. If not, we were going to just go through and have all of, am I correct for speakers? I think that was it, right, Councilor Bach? Yeah, I was going to go through the order of arrival of folks to ask any questions or make suggestions. I hope if anything, we all are of the same opinion. It's just, let's talk about all the tools in the toolbox to get there. Councilor Flaherty? Oh. Okay, well, he was here. So if he comes back in, go ahead.
Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, barely.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Just wanted to say that I've always been a strong supporter of public housing. I was actually born in the Old Harbor Housing Project, which is now the Maryland McCormick. So I'm testing women. I grew up with the testament that great things can come from public housing, particularly my mother. If it wasn't for public housing, when her dad died when she was very young, leaving my grandmother with 2 young kids and with nothing, public housing was there for them to help them get on their feet and to move forward. So appreciate the job that Kate Bennett does and her team, as did her predecessor, the late great Bill McGonigal, and the public-private partnerships that have become the new model to help us, renovate, refurbish, and revitalize public housing. So we need to continue to do that. I'll continue to support that any way they can, and we need to continue to talk about and promote more public housing opportunities in the city as we continue to become the city of the very rich and the very poor. There's a lot of folks with urban housing crisis, need of a roof over their head, and public housing does that. It's done it for my family, it's done it for families for generations. And footnote on the Old Harbor, which is now the Maryland McCormick, it was one of the first public housing developments built in the country. Our hope is that working with Kate and her team, we'll see some revitalization down at the Maryland McCormick in the very near future, and also being able to add more units of public housing, not only in South Boston, but to the entire share. I'm listening to the experts. Obviously, they know more about this than as a project kid.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flaherty. So just going in order of arrival, suggestions, thoughts. We'll start off with the lead sponsor, or the sponsor of this ordinance or hearing order, excuse me, Councilor Bach, followed by Councilor Janey, then Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thanks to everyone, both the panelists and the folks who testified. And I really want to echo what folks have said about the stability this can provide, and really that piece. It's not just about families being low income. It's about being able to count on the fact that when terrible things happen in your life, whether it's an illness that affects your family, whether it's a job loss, some other form of instability, that you are not also compounding that with losing your housing. And I think Joe started to explain this with the CDCs, but sometimes folks don't understand why it is that our CDCs find themselves in a difficult situation at those times when families experience those losses. And it's because their funding model does not allow for that flexibility that public housing and vouchers do, where the rent goes up and down in people's circumstances. So I just think that's such an important model when you think about like what a real social safety net looks like in a way that keeps our communities whole and stable. And the one other comment I wanted to enter, I didn't get to compete in the who has the most public housing sweepstakes because I represent the district with the least public housing. In fact, I don't think there is a single unit of conventional public housing in my district. There is the Mission Main redeveloped public housing, and there's some great project-based Section 8 voucher senior housing, but there's no conventional public housing in my district. And I want to highlight that because we've been talking about other related efforts today. on Wednesday, we'll be voting on the affirmatively furthering fair housing zoning ordinance, an effort that's been led by Councilor Edwards, and that I've been pleased to be able to also work on. And that's one of the things that's focused on is how do we get affordable housing and access for people from all protected classes to all parts of the city, including parts where they've been historically excluded. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about with this possibility is, you know, to Councilor Mejia's point, to Lauren's point about destigmatizing public housing, you know, the possibility of creating new public housing units all over the city, including in places where we don't see dense public housing existing previously, putting it on top of our public assets, looking for opportunities with public land, and then looking for those opportunities like Steve referenced of AOP buildings where we could stabilize some of our low income tenants who would otherwise lose their housing, but in often these high cost neighborhoods, I think is such an important piece of this in terms of really living into the promise of an integrated city and a city that's got a place for everyone in all of its neighborhoods. So I'm really excited about that. The question, I'll just ask one question of Kate and her team because I pepper them with questions and comments and opinions on this all the time, is just, you know, what I'm excited about, you referenced earlier, RAD, which is this federal program that basically for people's reference, it's like, Lauren said this, and so did Steve, but the money that comes in for a public housing unit on a monthly basis these days is not enough to make the like repairs to replace the roof every 20 years, right? It doesn't cover that kind of basic stuff. And then what's exciting about RAD, this federal program, is it basically increases the amount that you could get monthly for these units such that you would be able to be confident that you could maintain them in a good way. For the long run, but that doesn't, so it moves us into like, we could have stable units, and that's exciting because they have to be stable for us to be able to support 2,500 more of them. And creating those is going to give us access to millions and millions of federal dollars that we have the right to, that we're not using right now every year. So super exciting. But what Kate alluded to is that still doesn't generate for you enough money to take on debt to build these things in the first place. And that's why we're talking about adding this subsidy on in places where
Sorry, I'm on a city council here.
We're getting other support to get the units built. And you know, and so with, as Joe referenced, often his members are cobbling together funding, but it's only letting them get those tax credit units and not that deep affordability. My question for Kate is, I think one of the open and exciting spaces here is that the city has in recent years started to support public housing in its capital budget. And because these are a public good, right? And so we start talking about public housing in this way that really references the fact that it's not just for the person who lives in it, it's for the type of society we want to be. And there's support in our capital budget in recent years for the big project in Councilor Edwards's district in Charlestown. And also recently this year, we just approved a budget with funding for some of our senior housing. And I think tomorrow the city is issuing bonds to support that work. So I wondered if Administrator Bennett could just talk a little bit about that capital component and the kind of, you know, support in the city's capital budget that we might need to look for to really like do this at scale.
Yeah, thanks, Counselor. So you're right. The RAD operating subsidy is a more reasonable operating subsidy. I mean, the operating subsidy we get doesn't even, you know, isn't even sufficient to operate the property, which is kind of like our fundamental reality with our conventional public housing. The RAD reimbursement is much more reasonable, but it means you need to essentially inherit a free unit that you can then attach subsidy to. So by our math, to construct a brand new unit, we would probably need a couple $100,000 of capital subsidy to create that unit. And, you know, that would then get combined with tax credits and other sources, you know, to comprise the whatever $400,000 or $500,000 it actually takes to build a unit in this town. But once we had that capital subsidy and built the unit, we could then attach the fair cloth subsidy, convert it to RAD, and it would be reasonable going from there. What we've tried to do, because, you know, 2,500 units at 200,000 each is whatever, $400, $500 million, whatever that capital infusion is. While it'd be nice to do some new units, what we've also tried to do is find properties that are existing that don't need a ton of capital work that we could bring into this ownership and system where we can attach the subsidy, but there's not that such a huge capital need that either you need to construct a new unit or you need to do really intensive redevelopment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there's a variety of potential scenarios for capital investment that, that range from, 50,000 a unit, maybe up to that new construction number of $200,000 per unit that we're exploring.
Great, thanks. And I lied, I have one quick question for Sheila, which is just thinking about, we hear a lot about the frustration of IDP not being affordable enough, and sort of thinking about whether there's an opportunity here to pair this with IDP in a way that kind of buys down some of those units to a deep affordability. Just curious how you guys are thinking about that.
So we have given, Kate and I have been talking about this as a possibility. I think the next step is to, have a focus group with some of the owners to talk about the mechanics of this, but it is certain, first blush, it seems like an opportunity. I think we just need to get into the details. So we are interested in exploring it with you.
Great, thank you. And Madam Chair, I know there's lots of colleagues waiting, so I'll yield the floor. Thank you. You're muted, Madam Chair.
All this time with coffee in my hand, I should have woke up my like I don't know how to use Zoom. Oh my goodness, sorry about that. Councillor Janey, and then followed by Councillor Braden. Councillor Arroyo might have to step away and does not have any questions. So,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm out and about. I apologize for the lack of video, and it may be a little noisy and I might have problems with my connectivity. I want to thank again the panel and thank the maker. I think this is an important conversation. I would be interested in where the opportunities are for more housing in terms of any public land that we exist. If you have that information by neighborhood, I think it would be helpful. I would also be interested in finally settling the competition about public housing among my colleagues. I heard Councillor Flynn say he has the most number of units. I heard Councillor Edwards say she has the largest development. I'm convinced that I have the largest concentration of public housing in some parts of my district. And I wonder if someone would affirm that. And it presents a different kind of challenge when it's all concentrated. So I'd be interested again in the first question about opportunities by neighborhood, because I think it's important that we make sure throughout our city that people can afford to live regardless of neighborhood. So could someone quickly just speak to the opportunities available and get clarity around the facts around the competition, the friendly competition with colleagues?
Sure. Hi, Councillor. And so on the second point, yes, we'd be happy to put together a series of awards, and we will evaluate the opportunities for that. And I'm sure there's something for everyone. I'm sure there is. As to the opportunities, we are looking across the entire portfolio at both existing sites that might have additional land. We have a few vacant parcels that we still own that we're looking at as well. And again, we're looking at, with D&D at public facilities that might be able to add housing. I hesitate to say yet where the opportunities are in the portfolio because we haven't engaged in those conversations with residents yet.
No, I can appreciate that.
And I want a chance to do that. But at this point, we're casting the net as widely as we can. And I think, if we come back towards the end of Q1 in 2021, we'll be able to have more specific information.
I think that would be helpful, and I understand and deeply appreciate the need for engaging residents in the conversation. And at this point, I'm treating it as just a blank canvas of trying to understand where the various parcels are. Not all of it obviously will be developed for public housing, if that's what we're going to do. I'm sure some of it will be You'll do disposition the way you normally do it. So I would appreciate that whenever you have that available. I do want to just follow up on a comment that Councilor Arroyo made in his opening around the upkeep and maintenance of public housing. This is a huge issue in my district in terms of the public housing that currently exists and the lack of resources federally starting there. And let's hope that the new administration will make some adjustments so that we can keep up with the housing. So I'm thinking of different developments like Colgate, and there's some on Tremont and Columbus that are public housing. Then there are obviously the large developments as well. Can you speak to the investment or opportunities around making sure that they're not just all falling apart? And I think that's a big challenge for folks who live in public housing. They're not seeing the investment in terms of keeping up the housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree that we have a lot of really difficult conditions that we haven't been able to address. And we've been working hard to develop a strategy for every site. The same opportunity with the RAD program that we've been talking about relative to this surplus subsidy exists for us to convert our existing properties to that subsidy so that we can have more revenue essentially to do that investment. And so for our entire elderly portfolio right now is being planned for those conversions over the next 5 years. And we're really hoping that that will stabilize a lot of those properties. We're still working on strategies for some of our family sites. I am very hopeful that with the new administration, and we've actually had conversations already with their transition team about an infrastructure bill that would include public housing in the definition of infrastructure. Many of you will remember we were able to do some significant work when President Obama first came into office under the ARA bill. And we need that kind of capital infusion. And so we, as you know, we've engaged in a number of public-private partnerships. That's not the answer for every site. And so we're just, we're trying to work site by site to develop a strategy. We're further along with some properties than others. I acknowledge.
Councilor Bach, are you?
Thank you.
Councilor Jeremy, are you?
Yeah, I think that's good for this round. And then if there's an opportunity, I may have some additional. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilor Braden, followed by Councilor Mejia. And
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to go around back to the issue about tenant empowerment and also building family self-sufficiency, because one of the things that we don't seem to have the resources to do is to really ensure that the tenants are as resilient as possible, and also that is if you have a strong tenants association, I'm talking through the lens of Halston Brighton right now. If your tenants association is debilitated and disempowered and burnt out, then it ends up you have a lot of problems develop over time. So are there resources to help support the tenants associations and to I think it was, whose point was it? GBLS was talking about tenant empowerment strategies to help work from the ground up as well as from the top down.
That's a great question, Councillor. Thank you. There are tenant participation funds available that are part of our operating subsidy that we make available to the resident organizations. What I would say though is it can be a a big effort for resident organizations to bring on new blood and reconstitute themselves over time. So what we see a lot is this kind of ebb and flow of a resident organization with a strong leader who either moves on or passes away. And it takes a long time for that site to create momentum for a new resident organization. And there's not dollars for that organizing activity. There's sort of minimal operating dollars, to kind of administratively for that task force to keep going once it's established. So that is a gap. We look for grant funding and partnerships to try to help with that. And we have a number of partnerships, including with those on the call at GBLS and Vita Urbana, and many others who help with that effort, but that's clearly a need as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then also, where do we start? What's the first step in addressing in getting this idea rolling? Like, I'm very excited with the potential, but what's the first move that we have to make? I think I maybe missed it in all the conversation this morning, but just a tangible first steps that we need to be taking.
I think we just need to identify projects that can pencil out with this RAD subsidy. And so we are working on that. D&D is working on that. Some of the CDCs are working on that. And it's difficult because of, some of what we've talked about and the need for more capital than is available. But I think that's the key, is just identifying sites and projects. And I'm hoping over the next 90 days, we'll be able to come up with some places to start.
Very good. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It would appear that Councilor Arroyo actually does have a question. I apologize for skipping you, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you. No problem. I actually had service issues. So I just have one question. First off, I want to thank the panel for being so informative and also for trying to answer questions in depth. So often it feels like we don't get very, substantive answers to questions. And this is welcome relief. In terms of senior housing, this is something that I just ran. So I did a lot of canvassing back when people contact was okay. And it was striking how many folks wanted to downsize from the homes that they bought, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when these houses were incredibly affordable. But now those houses on the same market are probably in the high 400s, 500,000s, right? And so the issue is their income's not the same. They're not, they're not working on large savings. They're property rich and cash poor, and they want to downsize. They want to move into affordable housing. But one of the issues that we moved into, and so this is kind of a two-part question. The first is, where are we on increasing the stock of senior affordable housing in the city of Boston? Where are we with that, and where are we with increasing it? The second was a more nuanced question where, we have the affordable senior housing that's coming in to Hyde Park. And one of the major questions and sort of points that they were making were, we're opening up housing stock to the community. But the problem was selling of a property would actually put their net worth above the ability to be eligible for affordable housing. And there was no way, at least at that time, to square that. So basically, if you sold your home, you're cash poor, you sold your home, now you're cash rich, but you don't really have large savings, you just have what you have, and you want to move into an affordable housing unit, it was not possible. And so the question is, what are we doing to sort of solve that? Is that a solvable issue? Is that something that we need the feds for? How are we looking at that? So those two, I guess, three things. Where are we on housing stock for seniors? Where are we on increasing it? And how do we deal with the, cash poor, land rich who want to sell their homes and move into affordable housing, but then the income of that sale changes their dynamic?
So I'll start with the first, Counselor, and I will get over to you with the next, couple of days. a listing of all the senior housing in the city, but also, more importantly to your question, a pipeline of the senior affordable housing that is in construction or that we have identified sites for. I think we're making progress. But I agree with you. We really do need to increase the sites and the resources available to create new senior housing. But we do have a pretty healthy pipeline right now with 2 closing, I think even this week, 1 in East Boston and 1 in the North End, but we need more. So, but I'll get that report over to you. You know, when you ask that about the seniors, it's something I've given a lot of thought, but not recently too. So I think we may need to get back to you, but I'll let Kate talk to you or answer the question as well. You are absolutely right that we do have asset limits. So when new affordable housing units come online and they're available, we do have asset limits because if someone's got $200,000 in the bank or $300,000 in the bank and someone's got 15 cents in the bank, we do want to prioritize those that, don't have assets, don't have any other opportunities given how tight the market is. But that for seniors, they may have equity, but then their incomes are really low and very, very fixed. There are developments in the city that take that into consideration, but I want to get back to you on whether or not they're like how broad that policy exception is. So I don't want to misspeak today. I think I know the answer, but I want to get back to you. But it is a little slightly different with public housing, Kate. Am I correct?
There are different rules, but it's the same, it's the same construct, which is that, at some point, if you have a certain number of assets, then your eligibility is not prioritized. Again, I can, like Sheila, I can get back with specifics on that.
Yeah. There is a development in, which I always point to, which I love, and we've had a hard time getting developers interested in replicating it, and that's the Sophia Snow House outside of, well, it's sort of as you head towards Roslindale and West Roxbury, but it's, seniors are able to take their assets, buy down the construction debt or the loan that's currently outstanding, and then when they pass away or when they leave, they get 90% back of that investment, and their housing monthly costs are incredibly low. It's a very good model for seniors that have assets but very fixed incomes.
Thank you. I didn't know that about the Sophia Snow House. That's actually that's interesting, because I know in my district what we have is a lot of folks who bought homes in this district when those homes were maybe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, are working on really fixed incomes, making tough choices about their utilities versus their medicine. But when they sell their home, they are suddenly influxed with cash, but that's really not enough to spread out over whatever their rest of their life is. And so I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way, and it sounds like we'll have this conversation at a later date, just to figure out how we can accommodate somebody in that situation who wants to downsize, wants to leave their home, live with more dignity and more access to resources, but also on the fixed income that they have. And so I think the Sophia Snow plan sounds interesting to me. I wonder if that's something the city could pilot as well.
Yeah, and I would be glad to set up a meeting with whoever is interested to talk to the management company just to understand the mechanics. They could explain it probably better than I, but I could use a refresher as well. So I'd be glad to pull that together if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. I'm sorry. I just want to acknowledge that I have a conflict and I have to drop off the call. Joel Wool, who you may remember from another life, is here with me as special advisor. He can take questions, as well as Gail Livingston, Senior Deputy Administrator. And again, I just want to thank everyone for your interest in this. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is great, because I reserved all of my questions for Joel, all of my tough, hard questions about his training, about his experience, wondering really where his vision has come from housing. I reserved all of that for Joel. And I just have to say, this is emotional moment for me because Joel was my policy director up until this year. We were waiting for this at one point in time to come where he would be testifying at a city council hearing on housing. And Joel was behind charter amendment that's coming up tomorrow. And he also was behind the affirmative furthering or housing amendment coming up tomorrow. So I am emotional because I'm very proud to have worked with you, Joel. And I'm very happy and just was waiting for this moment to happen. And so I'm also stupid emotional as of late, so I'm sorry. But thank you for everything you've done, Joel, and I want to give credit where credit is due. Next up, Councilor Mejia. And then followed by Councilor Flynn.
Madam Chair, thank you. I'm so appreciative.
I so appreciate that honesty and vulnerability. Chairwoman Edwards, oftentimes we're always asked to leave ourselves at the door. And I think it's beautiful that you are just bringing all of you into this space. And so thank you for doing that and being you, okay? Now on to my questions, y'all. No, I'm just joking. No, but I think Councilor Edwards, you're the only, I really do appreciate all of your hearings because I feel like we all learn a lot, or at least I learn a lot. And I know that the people who are following along are learning so much because you're so intentional about making sure that people understand all the jargon that is discussed and you help break things down. So I always show up to all of your hearings just because I know I'm going to learn a lot. And so thank you. So I just have a few questions. I'm just curious about, there was something that was mentioned in the hearing order. It says that the Boston public housing stock is desensified. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I would like somebody on the panel or even the sponsor to talk about what desensifying looked like. Basically what we have before and what it did defensify into. What is an appropriate level of density to both meet the need of affordable units while not creating soulless tower blocks? So if somebody could just help our audience and me understand what that is, that would be great. And then I ask because we've seen high dense affordable housing units, large towers, blocks of 100 units, and how they don't contribute to the sense of safety and community in certain neighborhoods. So I'm just curious about what the thinking is around that. And then the last question that I have is that I feel like when, and maybe it might be not the last question, I don't know, but I feel like when we drive past public housing developments, you can still tell that you're driving past the public housing. And I'm just curious, how can we encourage public housing developers that we want to feel like it's a more natural part of the community and it doesn't want to feel like other people live in these developments. And so I'm just curious, like, how intentional are we being to build affordable housing? Again, going back to that stigma that exists and living in development, what role we're playing to create housing that feels less stigmatized. And then the last thing that I'd like to lift up is that I think, well, let's just answer those questions. And if I have time, then I'll go on my little rants.
Councilor Mejia, I'm happy to answer unless the sponsor of the hearing order wanted to comment. But I'll just briefly say to start off. Well, first, actually, let me briefly thank my my friend and mentor, Madam Chair Edwards. So thank you so much for your words. Regarding your comments, so the first one, I believe it's and Administrator Bennett referred to this, but de-densifying public housing. So. Without putting a particular value on that, just to start off, I think part of this is literally, and to your point, in some development and redevelopment streams, we've had very concentrated housing that has been deconcentrated. So whether there were fewer overall units or simply more spread out, that the strategy employed took a very concentrated set of public housing units and dispersed those so that they were less dense. I think, and to some of the issues that you're raising around stigma, around design, around the aesthetic and social integration with the neighborhood. I mean, I think that from BHA, there's really several pieces here. One is that in the 21st century and with current ideas about what we need to do in community planning to engage with people, I think part of that is when we bring on design consultants and we work with city partners or private partners to do the same thing. We set that that neighborhood connection as a goal from the outset. So I think that's something you can hold us accountable, hold us accountable to that we will do and we intend to do. And the administration, I think, I can't speak for that, but I think that we will work in full partnership in that area. I think some of the other pieces do relate to the other supportive elements that are necessary for people, families, right, households to have achievement. And I think Councilor Brady and some of our colleagues hit on some of these elements. But when we build housing, or when we even provide vouchers in places, when we refer families into housing programs, making sure that the supports and networks are there and having that as part of the design. So I think that's an iterative thing. That's something we can take feedback on and work with, and something that members of the council have been, I think, fairly involved with and commenting on the structure and referral of different particular housing programs. So I apologize that that's not a completely concrete answer, but I think part of it is just that we need to build in those supports. We need to build in that design to the process of design, and it can start from when we bring on a consultant and when we do our internal planning.
Thanks for that. And I want to be super mindful of time. I'm just going to say one more thing. My mom had a Section 8 voucher, so I was able to. It was mobile, so we were able to live anywhere in the city of Boston, and I think that also helps provide a sense of dignity, and for folks so you continue to think about public housing and subsidies. Just always, I think that giving people some flexibility about where they live is also important. I always tend to be concerned that public housing tends to be, or any subsidies are always in high concentrated areas of poverty, and I think that other continues to otherize us based on where they show up. And I think that we have an opportunity now to really, and I'm really excited about the furthering a fair housing amendment, because I think that's going to help us to address that issue. So I'm really excited about that. And then I just wanted to I know we talked about elder housing. I'm also really concerned about youth. We have a lot of young people who are transitioning out of foster care who don't have places to live. And I'm just curious, as we start thinking about housing, there's also LGBTQ. So I'm just curious about housing stock for other groups that we haven't mentioned here today, and what's the plan for some of our most vulnerable populations. Chief Dillon might be a good person to answer.
So you're raising a good point. And we, as you know, we did work on 2019. It seems like years away or ago, but we did work on a plan to end homelessness among our youth and young adult populations. Something that I know is very important to you. And after a lot of dialogue with focus groups and young adults that have been homeless, oftentimes they don't need a public housing unit or a voucher, or they probably need, they know they do, rental subsidies for several years, but they also need that help with college and job skills, etc. But some actually do need some long-term housing opportunities. So that's a population where not everybody needs to be assigned a public housing unit, but we need to have flexibility in our housing response. And almost every population that we talk of with you, needs a certain type of housing really to thrive, right? Seniors need really mostly, very affordable housing with a lot of supports. And family housing is something else, and youth housing is something else. And then for our individual homelessness populations, they need, smaller units, usually in a community with a lot of 24/7 support. So each population, has a different housing prescription. That's what makes it interesting, but that's what makes it sometimes an unlimited resource environment complicated to deliver.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And just to also to give a little shout out to the work from D&D. We did, I'm sorry if you mentioned this, the first elder LGBTQ housing. You did mention that. Sorry about that.
Today, but it's great.
Yes. But that was also in response to your question, Councilor Mejia, about specifically that aging population needing unique, safe space housing, because generations ago, and unfortunately some of that generation, or a good chunk of that generation ago in senior housing, still has some of the deep prejudices and discrimination against some of our LGBTQ population. So making sure we had a place of dignified, beautiful housing for them to land as well was important. I believe Councilor Flynn had a conflict or had to leave. Councilor Sabi George, and then Councilor Flaherty if he's still on, and then I will do some quick suggestions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for the presentation and the level of conversation today. I think it's really important, and just want to echo and just say again how excited I am about the work on the special commission going forward. As we need more public housing in the city of Boston. Families who are experiencing homelessness would benefit, I think, the greatest from that resource. I forget who, I don't know if it was Lauren or Kate earlier, mentioned the very long wait lists for our BHA, 40,000 families on that list. And, a number of us have talked several times about, how real is a wait list if it's that long? Is it, we really should just talk about closing that list, because we're setting families up for the longest wait ever. Is there any very direct study or analysis that's gone on to truly look at that wait list to understand the real need for the amount, what the real need is for housing, additional housing units across the city for public housing?
So I'll jump back in. Thank you, Councillor. So I guess I wanted to say a couple of things there. One, and I think certainly the city partners may comment on this as well, as to general housing need. We have certainly looked at issues related to the wait list. It's further complicated at VHA, I think, just to back up, because we have both federal and state public housing, as well as administering the voucher program. So we're initiating a city voucher. Thank you to the mayor and the council for that. So we really have multiple wait lists, and it is something of immense complexity. In terms of if it's a number of units or number of dollar figure for closing that, or for then that's something we would have to circle back on. What I can say is that we are constantly thinking of and looking at ways to improve our waitlist processes, and then really in terms of both how we work in state and federal programs, and to better coordinate and consolidate it. One, so it's more user friendly. Part of that is just an overall modernization effort at the BHA that's going more online, having more interactive, updating our housing service center, but just also again how we work with the state and federal actors. So I think it's several different questions in one. There's certainly a long wait list there. We want to be focusing on housing people and on maintaining housing and creating good social conditions and supporting residents in that, and not on the administrative acts of pushing paper. And I think that that's something that's very much on our staff's mind, because the more we can A, have housing or job resources for people so that they don't need to be on it, and B, process that faster, the less of it is on us of an administrative burden. So that's I think what I'm gonna have to leave that as for a general comment, unless there's further specific questions. But if it is related to, again, what's the resource need to get everyone off of that, I think just want to make sure we circle back with a holistic response.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. And your audio is in and out, so just to
my apologies.
That's fine. No, it's fine. The other thing I think that we have to also make sure that we're considering when we're looking at any of that analysis is for families who are either overhoused, to make sure that families are right-sized. I think that will create some sort of shift in the housing stock that's available and help us better plan for what we're missing, which I think are some of the bigger units when we think about larger sized families are most difficult to house, especially those that are experiencing homelessness. And then the other piece is some shifting around our policies within public housing. It's something that we've talked a lot about in the Family Shelter Roundtable, and creating opportunities for older children to stay at home longer, you know, to be a little bit more also creative in families that double up for lots of different reasons, and how do we create circumstances where all of that is allowable. And you know, I think that all of those sort of pieces really impact the housing stock availability and really understanding what we need and where to invest future dollars. That's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If Councilor Flaherty is on. Okay. If not, I'm going to go ahead and just rattle off some suggestions. I think with the hope that we kind of can move this hearing into next year. I'd love for the Councilor Box, if she'd consider this being an ongoing hearing and conversation. And really, I love the thought of this setting the goal of 2,500 new units. So in meeting that goal, or in hoping to get to that goal, I would like for the administration to possibly, with all your free time, come up with what's the dollar? Let's measure what it would take to get 2,500 new units of public housing. I'm genuinely curious. I feel like, you know, sometimes what gets measured gets done. And what would it take? Now, I don't believe that entire burden should be on the city of Boston. We discussed as part of this, there's going to be federal subsidies. We hope under the new HUD administration, there might be some parts that trickle in. There's also, you know, I think it helps with the narrative around the transfer fee. I think it helps with the narrative around linkage. If we say, this is the goal, federal government's putting in X, Y could come from such and such, Z can come from such and such, then D, that's not even in order, whatever. And then another chunk could come from the city and such and such. So I would like to know what the overall goal is and then how we get there. Is this a goal that we would have a timeline for? Is it 20? Obviously we can't do 2,500 in a year, but what if it was 2,500 in 5 years or 2,500 in 10 years? That's 250 new units a year to get to that goal. I don't know, but I'd like in future conversations to set those kinds of goals. What's the timeline? What's the funding mechanisms to get to those goals? Because I personally, I think every single one of us is committed to that. Not only that, but I have every intention of winning the concentration, the size, and the number of public housing units in the city of Boston for District 1. So we want to make sure that I come out on top one day and win that competition. That being said, I also wanted to think about resources and counting of what we have available to us right now that could be places where public housing can go, that the city controls. So, and this is me, again, thinking just off the cuff. I love the idea. I think Councilor Brock brought it up. I brought it up before, of looking at all of our public buildings, schools that have flat roofs. I don't know, police departments, but places where we have potential to build up and build dense. Why aren't we looking at those for public housing or subsidized housing places for our communities? Even if it was workforce housing for teachers to live on or near the school, or for the police or fire to live on or near their firehouses or police stations. Where we have land, where we have flat roofs, I think we should be looking for where we should build. So I'm hoping that we can take an accounting, honestly, of potential spaces where we can build. The other condition I'd like for us to consider is when we are taking any property out of a DPA, which we're doing a lot of, there's a lot of talk about that in East Boston on our coast, on our entire coast for the designated port areas. There's a movement to move some of that property out of a designated port area, some to maintain the industrial use, which I think we could talk about how we can maximize linkage and other funds from that if they maintain the industrial use. But for others who want to build any form of housing, how this should be part of that conversation. and almost a requirement for any removal of a DPA. Again, this is a resource and it's a leveraging point to maximize the most for housing and for affordable housing. So I just wanted to bring those things up as potential ideas with the hope that we're having this conversation every couple months or every quarter to one day get to this is the goal this year, this is how it's going to be funded, this is the push and that we ultimately want there. So that it's just a rattled off ideas. I hope the chair, or I'm sorry, the lead sponsor would be okay with reintroducing this and having this continued conversation. So that's it from me. Is everyone okay with those ideas? I don't know, Sheila or BHA, I don't know. Is it okay? Would it be feasible to figure out what the numbers are and what could be done? I know we're headed into a recession, so I'm not talking about next year, but I do think it is wonderful to talk about this overall goal, but to break it down and have some dollars assigned to it might make even arguing for the transfer fee and other measures even more pressing. I don't know.
I certainly would welcome, and I think Kate has a timeline in her mind about identifying sites that we could build additional public housing. I would like to see some of these be used at our acquisitions, some of them that are in your neighborhood. So I think we should put together a rough outline, like sort of like, how could we get these in the market with some free, pretty quickly. What it would cost, where the sources are coming from. So I think that's a fairly, not simple, but an exercise we could do in short order.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'm going to check in with the lead sponsor, and for my colleagues, because I think this is going to be a continued conversation, I will likely keep this in committee, and so that we can either reintroduce or have this going on into next year. I think what I've heard is overwhelming support for meeting the goals. Councillor Bach, I wanted to turn it over to you, and I encourage any of my colleagues with concluding remarks to raise their blue hands, and subsequently we'll allow everyone to say some final remarks who want to, and then we'll probably close the hearing. Councillor Bach?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, what you're suggesting is very much in line with what I was intending and have discussed with the departments. I think that we've been having really productive conversations, as mentioned, me and the departments, and also some of the stakeholders here. And we thought it was a good opportunity to have a public conversation with the council now. But I think the next step is it's a blueprint and a path forward. And we've heard, there's no doubt about the sense of urgency, right? We have so many families that are homeless, so many families on these wait lists. And here we have a federal resource that I think there are creative ways to tap in ways that could alleviate some of that pressure all over the city, including in District 8. So I'm very excited to work with the departments around kind of charting that plan. And I think that, as you say, there are places where I think having that plan will show us, it will measure for us exactly what the political will is that we need to marshal to make certain resources available in order to execute on the plan. And I think that that's always helpful. I think it's much easier for people to understand why we need to marshal resources when they can see exactly what it's leading to, and concretely who it will house. So that's it's very much my hope and intention in the new year for us to all keep talking about, and more importantly than talking about, moving forward on this. So I just want to thank you, and really thank the departments and MACDC and Family Aid and GBLS and City Life Feeder Urbana, all for being here. And for the work that you guys do every day. And my hope with this is that we can simultaneously do all of that kind of emergency work that's happening every day right now about trying to prevent people from being evicted, about getting people emergency housing. And then at the same time, have our eyes on this bigger prize of how we have just much wider provision of social housing, destigmatized, proudly public, social housing to really kind of transform our community and the stability of our community. So thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I see one blue hand from Councilor Mejia for concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you again to Councilor Bach and Chairwoman Edwards for hosting this, and to the entire panel and administration. I love participating in these hearings because you guys always bring it and are always 100% present. And it's refreshing, as Councilor Arroyo mentioned earlier. And I also just wanted to just say that, you know, I advocates and folks who have been doing a lot of work in the housing space, you know, there's a sense of urgency, and we always wonder what is stopping us from, you know, moving forward. And, you know, we see a lot of people who can no longer afford to live in Boston now are packing up and moving to Brockton and, you know, Randolph. We're losing people left and right. And so I'm very encouraged by this conversation, but I know it's just the beginning of the work. But I'm excited to be a part of it and really grateful to all of those who participated in holding us accountable to the things that we said we were going to do and how we go about getting there. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimonies. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. With that, I'm going to close out today's hearing. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Paul.